Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Marilyn Sanders Mobley, Vice President for Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity, and an English professor here at Case Western. And I first just want us, even though I don't know where she is right this minute, she's probably somewhere doing logistics, I would just like to pause to give Dr. Rhonda an applause for So when you see her, let her know our session started with an applause for her for being the visionary leader that she has been behind the Social Justice Institute, behind the think tanks, and behind so many other good work here at the university. I'm largely here because of Dr. Rhonda, and I want to say that not just because she chaired the search. Aha, we just gave you an applause, my sister. Not only because she chaired the search, but because she was on the chair of the President's Advisory Council on Minorities in helping President Barbara Snyder shape a vision that, as you heard last night at the opening, had already been articulated in the university's strategic plan. And that vision was that this be a cabinet level position at the university. And at some point, I hope to talk to Dante because he did paint a picture of their two different models of getting the work done, and I still want to engage him on that and talk about that. But as a professor of African American literature and a Toni Morrison scholar, I articulated my own vision to be part of the faculty as well. So I knew I was hired to be a VP, but I came here to be a faculty member as well. So I work at this university not only in that capacity, but also as a tenured professor of English in the College of Arts and Sciences. And I agree with Dean Taylor that Dr. Rhonda is a force, not only on our campus, but in Cleveland and in the country. I'm delighted to have this opportunity because I don't know how many of you know the work of Zora Neale Hurston. If you don't, shame, shame. But in Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Were Watching God, she talks about feeling like she's grown 10 feet just listening. I feel like in between last night listening to Sister Sonia and this morning and even early afternoon, I've grown just listening to what other people have to say. So my heart has been touched by this topic, and my head as a black scholar and as an intellectual who understands teaching as my calling. So I've gotten to a point in life when I say teaching is my calling, some people think it's the corniest thing, but it absolutely is my calling. It's just that my classroom has changed. My mother was a Head Start teacher. My late father was an educator, NAACP leader, community activist, and school administrator, first in Akron, Ohio. That's where I'm born and raised. Yay for Akron. And then in Detroit, Michigan. My dad died when he was in Michigan. He just died in June. My parents' example and that of educators all around me inspired me to become an educator. My presence in the academy has been somewhat orthodox, though. A lot of people in the academy get a PhD and then teach the way they were taught. And they've never been taught how to teach. I'm just going to say that. So having first taught at JFK in the Bronx, then in adult education in Manhattan, and then in community colleges both here and in New York, at Shaker Heights High School 4 years, and then at Howard, George Mason University, Bennett College for Women, and now here, I know deep down in my soul a great deal about what has happened and is happening. I come to my work now not only as an educator, but also as a mother and a grandmother who has learned a great deal both in and outside of the classroom. And Stanley Miller and I just talked at lunch. Our lunch table conversations is what happens when people move in certain neighborhoods and think they can just abdicate, just throw up their hands and say, my children are in a good school now, all is well. Not so. So some of what I've learned has come from advocating for my own children. And yet we have some education advocates and leaders on this panel who know even more than I do. And I am excited about their individual and collective knowledge. Dr. Rhonda arranged a conversation that we began talking about what we're going to say, but you all are free to say whatever you want to say. If you change your mind from that conversation, it's fine. I'd like to start with two epigraphs and then introduce our panelists. My first epigraph is from James Baldwin. His essay, A Talk to Teachers, in a book called Multicultural Literacy, has just been in my heart since I read it. And he says, if you are compelled to lie about one aspect of anybody's history, you must lie about it all. And the second is from Bell Hooks. We must bow at the shrine of Sister Bell Hooks. She says, the classroom remains the radical space of possibility. That's just a simple sentence, but that sentence has been part of what governs me, that in the classroom, you are in a radical space if you make it so. So the possibility is there if you make it so. Some people don't understand the radical space that the classroom is, but I have. So these people are getting ready to throw down. So we're going to start first with Matthew Krieger, and he is an attorney on the staff of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. After serving as a consultant on the Dismantling the School to Prison Pipeline Initiative, his work grows out of his commitment to improve and reform the school discipline system in our schools. Boy, I'm just ready for this. He coordinates the Dignity in Schools campaign, a national coalition of parents, educators, and civil rights organizations to reframe the school discipline debate. We just heard about that, right? Reframing the narrative. As a teacher who believed in alternatives to suspension, I am very excited to learn more about his work. And I'm going to introduce all of our panelists, and then we can just go for it. Second to him, we hope, based on the technology, will be Pauline Lipman, Professor of Educational Policy Studies and Director of the Collaborative for Equity and Justice in Education at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Her teaching, research, and activism grew out of her commitment to social justice and liberation, and you hear from that the moment she speaks. I remember I met you on the phone. She has worked with parents, teachers, and students to challenge school closings and market-driven solutions in urban neighborhoods, and has numerous publications and books on her work, including her newest one, which is on the table. Our next speaker is Shearer, a native of Detroit who moved to Cleveland in 1994 from Detroit. She is both an employee and a parent activist in the Metropolitan Cleveland School District. She is the board chair of Common Good Ohio, an organization that fights for economic justice for the people of Ohio. She is a school delegate for District 1199, where she serves on the executive board, and we're grateful to have her and the perspective she brings to this panel. Finally, our fourth panelist is Alexis Crosby. I'm particularly proud to see her on this panel, not only because she is an alum, but because she was one of my students. So I had the privilege of hearing how Alexis thinks and how her ideas flow and what she cares deeply about. And it's no surprise that after she graduated, she's continuing to do social justice work. Some of you who were at our other student leadership initiative know that Alexis was part of the Power Up student leadership panel. So we're glad for her voice as well. And please help me welcome our panelists, and we'll begin with Matt Krieger.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me okay? If you're back there, can you hear me okay? All right. So my name is Matt Krieger. I'm an assistant counsel with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Dr. Brock, I'm going to use the words. We work to promote a more inclusive and racially just democracy, and I want you to tell me if we use them right. Okay. This is seminal time for us. We are now 6 months and 1 day from the 60-year anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education. And I'm talking to you today about school discipline and what we call the school to prison pipeline, what our colleagues in the prior session called the cradle to prison pipeline, because we find ourselves returning to some of the seminal questions that founded my organization, which is who is welcome in our schools. Okay. This is not time to go too deep into the numbers. Gabriella is a recovering attorney. She told us last session, I'm still an active one. We build our cases based on precedent, on data, right? Like we don't have time for this today, right? Except to highlight a couple things, right? There are so many things about a school building when you walk into them that look no different than they did back when I was a teacher, back when I was a student, back when you were a student, and sometimes back when our parents were students. Sometimes the same teachers are there, right? One thing that is drastically different, and we're going to hear about another with privatization, right? One thing that is drastically different is the way that we handle discipline in our schools, right? Our suspension rates, our expulsion rates are at their all-time highs. Our arrest rates are skyrocketing. They're for things like in Bryan, Texas, where we've recently filed a complaint for disrupting public school, for disorderly conduct - language, which just means you cursed in school. okay? Our schools are relying on police, not just for safety, but for these disciplinary issues. You have 3.3 million students being suspended at least once each year, and we're turning to things like alternative schools, cyber alternative schools, any way we can push kids out and into different things and begin or continue the pipeline that Dan and his peers were talking about. This is something that is affecting all students, like a kindergartner named Celicia Johnson in Milledgeville, Georgia, who was handcuffed and arrested after throwing a temper tantrum in school, right? Or a middle school student in Queens named Alexa Gonzalez, who was arrested, literally arrested, when she wrote on her desk, right? Not a gang sign, right? She wrote, "I love my friends," not on a Sharpie, right? With an erasable marker. And she was arrested at her school, right? And then 6-year-old Cub Scout, Zachary Christie, and this is the one that I used to say, other white people, this can happen to you, right? Like, was taken to an alternative school or put in an alternative school for 45 days for bringing a camping utensil for show and tell from his, like, Cub Scout troop, right? Just not as bad and not as severe and not as pervasive. We know better, folks. This is common sense. You don't do this to children if you want them to succeed, all right? Okay? We didn't need some of our allies, our friends, like the Council of State Governments or the American Academy of Pediatrics or the American Psychological Association or the Centers for Disease Control to tell us that if you are out of school, you are not learning, or you are learning the wrong things, right? You are more likely to drop out of school. You are more likely to be retained a grade, become involved in the juvenile or criminal justice system, become a parenting teen. This is not how we set our students up to succeed, right? This hurts not just the students who experience these punishments, right? This hurts our schools as a whole, right? A school with high suspension rates, scores lower on standardized tests across the board. A school with high suspension rates are places where educators don't feel supported by administrators, students don't feel supported by teachers or administrators, and there's this lack of trust, and as a result, you get a sense of a lack of safety. And perhaps most harrowing in this critique of zero tolerance that the American Psychological Association did was the finding that there were no proven gains in school safety by getting tough in our schools. We know this already too, right? That it's our disenfranchised students that are hit the hardest by these policies, whether they be students with disabilities, students involved in the foster system, LGBTQ youth, but most certainly students of color. Right? African American students are 3.5 times as likely as their white peers to be suspended or expelled. The Council of State Governments, as nonpartisan, as centrist an organization as you can get, went down to Texas and looked at the discipline and juvenile records of 1 million middle and high school students over a 7-year period. And they found race to be a predictive factor in whether or not you were going to get a suspension, right? In fact, perhaps the single most important one, even if there were other demographic differences, language, socioeconomic status, disability status, gender, anything, it was race, okay? Again, let's not go to the numbers too much. If we're doing discipline in our schools, because if discipline means helping to encourage our students how to learn how to solve problems, how to mature, how to address, how to grow socially and emotionally, right? And if we're trying to address things that harm the community of our schools or disrupt students from learning, and I mean that, right? Like we have to figure out how to address minor misbehavior in ways that don't send our kids to prison, right? And so if you have a minor misbehavior, it should be punished by something like detention, right? Maybe if there's major misbehavior, you use something that removes the student from school, okay? That should be what a curve of discipline should look like, right? That's not what it looks like when it comes to race, okay? This is the coolest thing. Thank you for that. The laser shows where the curve should be, right? It should run like this, and that's absolutely not what it does. So African American students in elementary and middle schools are far more likely to get out-of-school suspension or expulsion for this minor misbehavior. This is research done by Russ Skiba at Indiana University, and in a similar study, he looked at what those incidents were, and it is not It is not alcohol possession, cigarette possession, right? Like weapons possession, the types of things that are objective and you know them when you see them. It's the subjective. It's the defiance, willful defiance, disrupting public schools, disrespect, right? Use the mic. Thank you. Yeah, you know, you get excited, man. I drank coffee instead of water, man. Like, it's a good group. So, and I know I got to watch my time too. So if we're doing this, right, and we're doing this at a time when we're here to close the achievement gap and we're here to end the dropout crisis, how are we going to do that if students aren't even allowed in school, okay, in the first place? All right, and I said, right, that we are on the verge of the 60th anniversary of Brown, right? For my organization, that was a long-term strategy that was built over 20 years, and there were test cases filed across the country, right? And you weren't afraid to lose, because it was all going toward one goal, one strategy, right? And you could absorb the hits, right? And I think it's fair to say that as a community, whatever we are, as parents, as students, as educators, as advocates, we've been grappling and looking for what is that strategy. The courts have eroded so many of our civil right protections, right? We have the privatization issues that we're facing, the testing issues that we're facing, and the NRA telling us that we need to arm the lunch ladies, right? Like what are our strategies to move this work forward? And I think what we've been working on as a community across the country is how do we come together as parents, as students, as educators, as advocates to speak with one voice on what we no longer see as a dropout, but as a push-out crisis, okay? And how do we support the parents and the students who are at the center of this and making changes in their community? So I'm not going to talk about something that LDF is doing. Right now I'm going to talk about something that Padres y Jóvenes Unidos and our allies at the Advancement Project did in Denver, where they organized over years around a campaign for the rights of students and the rights of youth. And they said to then Superintendent, now U.S. Senator Michael Bennet, we need to use restorative justice in our schools, right? Our students can solve the problems that are happening in their building, right? Take their own responsibility for them, grow from them, learn from them, and make the schools feel safer and more engaging in the process. And they did, right? These students power mapped by interviewing every juvenile probation officer, police officer, school resource officer, teacher, principal, down the line. They formed this campaign, and they ended up partnering with the district not only to revise its discipline code, but then to partner in securing grants for teachers to be trained in restorative justice and how to use it. When they did that, their out-of-school suspension rate dropped by over 40%, and their referral to law enforcement or to school resource officers dropped by over 60%, right? Like, I mean, that's, and it's just in how we treat each other, right? Okay. In Los Angeles, a parent organizing group called Cadre worked with a host of partners toward a series of systematic reforms that started with the Discipline Foundation policy in 2006. It required every school to implement something called school-wide positive behavior support. This is one of those evidence-based practices in how you do discipline that if we had time we could talk about. But the point is this. Cadre parents went into every school in their district, which is District 7 in LA. Right? And if you were doing it, they wrote a report that said this school is actually making this work. And we're seeing a drop in the discipline rates. We're seeing an increase in the attendance rates. We're seeing an increase in academic achievement. But if that binder and that memo and that regulation was sitting up somewhere on a shelf gathering dust, right, these parents wrote a shadow report that called it out, right, across the district. And no surprise, and this is true of both Denver and Los Angeles, in the schools that were implementing these practices, not only were they able to reduce their rates, they were shrinking the racial disparities in the punishments that students were receiving, right? So what we call now a racial discipline gap was being lessened and eliminated as well. So one place, one gathering point for us as a community as we do this is the Dignity in Schools campaign. Dr. Mobley kindly referred to me as a coordinator of the whole campaign. No way they'd let an attorney do that, right? Like my job is to serve to facilitate the federal work that the campaign does because right now we've gotten a lot of attention in Washington on what's happening. But what this is this group of parents, of students, of educators and advocates working to reframe this debate around a human right to education, a human right to dignity in our schools, right? Which is how we have galvanized our support and built our strength. The campaign is organizing a series of just ways to be organized, and one of them is the Solutions Not Suspensions campaign. And what it is a call for a moratorium on out-of-school suspensions until a district is ready and willing and able to implement the types of best practices that we've seen work in Denver, we've seen work in Los Angeles. And what this is a call not just against our districts, but how do you partner like they did in Denver? How do you partner and work to make sure that the teachers receive the training and support they need, so that if you were like me, when you walked into a classroom, you had not a lick of classroom management training, right? Like, you get that, and you're supported in your classroom. Like I said, we've made such strides as a community of folks doing this work. Last year, Dick Durbin chaired a hearing ending the school-to-prison pipeline in the Senate. 2 days later, Sandy Hook happened, and as the parent of 2 children, right, this is still the scariest thing, that that you drop your children off at school one day, and that this happens, right? And what's even scarier about it is you can walk by the church that we all walked by on the way here and see a sign that says 125 gun violence deaths in Cuyahoga County since Sandy Hook, right? And not see that on the news, right? 7 days later, Wayne LaPierre and the NRA called for arming anybody who's in a school, right? To make sure that no matter what happened after Sandy Hook, NRA still had what NRA wanted, right? And we are faced with a host of obstacles in the federal government. We could talk about that work later, but in Ohio, right, where our partners and our advocates are now pushing back not only on the same voices that were calling for zero tolerance a decade ago or more, right, but this new wave of how do we bring more armed guards, more law enforcement, more police into our schools, right? And one way that we push back is this, and this is a youth organized campaign. It grew out of members in the Dignity in Schools campaign called You Can't Build Peace with a Peace. I'll leave it up here. That's the last slide, just so you can get on their Facebook page when you can. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Pauline Littman. I'm from the University of Illinois at Chicago and Teachers for Social Justice and the Collaborative for Equity and Justice in Education. I am so honored to have been invited to be part of this conference, and I really didn't know what to expect. I tend to go to a lot of conferences. This was one that has really enlightened me, inspired me, and I'm just honored to actually be up here with all these people and feel like I should really be in the audience because I've learned so much. So thank you so much. Thank you especially to Rhonda for inviting me and all the people who organized the conference. I wanted to start by saying that the line that Rhonda read from the poem this morning, which I don't have a good paraphrase of, but about that we are in the painful process, the painful moment of a death of one era and the beginning of another one, I think really captures deeply the moment that we're in, the challenges as well as the opportunities that we face. And I just want to preface my remarks by keeping that in mind. I'd like to start with a short video. And thank you so much to the people who scrambled to provide me with sound. Why didn't I think of that? Yeah, thank you. This is from Chicago, and we'll talk about it afterwards.
hair.
Yes.
Better than Monterey.
Education is a right. That is why we have to fight. Okay, that was it. I'm done. With that, I bring you greetings from Chicago. And these are really the greetings that I want to bring you from Chicago. That was Sean Johnson. He's 9 years old. He goes to Marcus Garvey High School, elementary school. It's one of the schools that Rahm Emanuel proposed to, and his appointed school board proposed to close this year. In the end, it wasn't closed, but 50 schools were closed. So Chicago was a laboratory for the neoliberal policies that we're facing in education across the country. School closings, turning them over to private operators, privatization, charter schools, high-stakes testing, defunding our neighborhood public schools. But Chicago is now also a center of the resistance to this. And that's what I want to talk about today, is that dialectic of being at sort of at the eye of the storm, and also the resistance that has developed out of it. But more than just the resistance is that we have an evolving education movement in Chicago that is forging a new people's education agenda, an agenda that's emerging from the communities and the parents and the teachers and the students. I've been involved in this struggle as part of Teachers for Social Justice, which is a citywide organization that's part of a national network of teacher activist groups in Chicago. And I've also been writing and documenting this whole process. And, I've written some academic pieces, but I've done a lot of research and collaboration with community organizations as we have tried to tell the story of what are the effects of these policies from the perspective of those who are actually affected. But trying to heed the warnings or the advice, really, of Eve Tuck, who warns us against damage research. The documentation that we are attempting to do is not only of the tremendously damaging effects of these policies, but also the ways in which communities are resisting, standing up, are strong, are resilient, are creating their own spaces of strength and alternatives, and recognizing really the complexity of people's experience. And it's out of that, I think, that we see the emergence of alternative visions and alternative possibilities. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about some of the experiences and insights from Chicago. In 2004, Chicago's Mayor Daley at the time launched Renaissance 2010, which was a policy to close 60 to 70 schools and open 100 new schools, as most of them as charter schools, or a type of charter schools. This policy was not developed by education researchers. It was not even developed by the mayor. It was developed by the Commercial Club of Chicago, which is an organization of the most powerful finance capitalists, corporate CEOs, and political elites in the country. And the proposal was developed through a report that they wrote called Left Behind in 2003. A year later, Mayor Daley announced Renaissance 2010 at a commercial club event, and the commercial club is a public-private partner with Chicago Public Schools to implement this policy. And under this policy, including the 50 schools closed this year, almost 150 schools in Chicago have been closed, turned around, phased out, or otherwise turned over to private operators. And almost that many charter schools or schools similar to charters have been created. These schools have overwhelmingly been in African American and Latino communities. 87% of the children affected by these policies are African American, actually low income African American. At the same time, Chicago Public Schools launched a whole new set of selective enrollment schools in affluent and gentrifying areas, and funded disproportionately charter schools and turnarounds. So we've seen a whole shift in the budget and a shift in the priorities away from neighborhood public schools to the private sector and to attracting middle class and upper middle class people to the city. So when we look at this, it should be pretty obvious. This is not an education agenda. There is nothing about this agenda that is supported by, I'm an education researcher. There's nothing in this agenda that's supported by education research. It is a business plan. It's a real estate development plan. It's a capital accumulation agenda. It's a white supremacist agenda. And it's driven by the intertwined logics of capital and race. And these are the logics that we see being repeated in cities across the U.S. as part of a larger neoliberal agenda to restructure our cities. And I don't know much about Cleveland, so if I'm wrong, you'll definitely tell me, I'm sure. But I do know something about Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, Detroit, and other cities. And what we see there is increasingly that the whole rationale of city government is how can we attract investment? How can we attract capital to the city? Real estate investment, investment in downtowns. How can we remake working class, especially low-income working class, deindustrialized areas of the city into new playgrounds and new living spaces for an upper middle class? Same here, okay. Well, that answers that question. Because this is real, it's actually not a US strategy, this is a global strategy. And it is part of an agenda to privatize public space as part of a process of cities competing with each other in the global economy. And Chicago's really, I've learned that there are no paradigmatic global cities. I'm having to revise some things I said. But Chicago is certainly a model of one type of global city. So we have to really understand these school closings and all these education policies in this context. We can't just look at education. We have to look at what's happening in our cities. So everything from the school to prison pipeline, which kids are being pushed out of school and which kids are being pushed into the prison system, which neighborhoods are being disinvested in, and as part of this whole process is all linked to this larger agenda for the city. So if you look at where the schools are closed and where new schools are opening, we did a lot of mapping, including creating maps that, in collaboration with community organizations, of course, that folks took door to door in their organizing. And you see an overlap between where schools were closed and which areas were areas of intense gentrification. So this is a process of actually, I've lost my notes, of course. This process is tied to the destruction of public housing. It's tied to closing down mental health clinics and other public health clinics. It's tied to closing down family child centers in Chicago. Chicago had the gold standard of family child centers. They closed them down around the city. They cost actually very little to operate. This is an integral process that's part of actually a strategy for the city, a strategy which we have nothing to say about, and which is being concocted in corporate boardrooms in collaboration with mayors around the city. And so if you take an example, the first stage of Renaissance 2010 was in the Mid-South area, which many people know is the Bronzeville area of Chicago, which is also an area of a large concentration of public housing. And the plan for transformation, which was the destruction of public housing, was tied to school closings. The architects of this talked about 3 legs to the stool: housing, schools, and retail. That's what we need to attract new investors into the area and a new clientele in the area. So this is actually a situation in which land that was apportioned to public housing, or in which working class people lived in historically, has now gained a new value in the city. So the land is valuable, but the current tenants are not. That's right, that's right. So closing schools is a key linchpin of this. Schools are anchors in communities that are disinvested in, that face high levels of poverty and unemployment. They're one of the few remaining institutions. They're often intergenerational institutions. And that's not just where you go to school, they have real meaning. Despite their failures, despite their problems, despite the weaknesses in the education systems, they nevertheless are important community institutions. So when you close those institutions, it's part of pushing people out of the community. This is a process of declaring schools failure through high-stakes testing and pathologizing them, the same way that public housing is disinvested in and pathologized, and then declaring them so pathological that they need to be closed, and by extension, the people who attend them and teach in them and live around them, and then reappropriating that space for capital accumulation and as a white space of, quote, civilization. And so this is what I think Bell Hooks is talking about. We were invoking a lot of Bell Hooks today. When Bell Hooks talks about home places, she's talking about schools and in black communities that are home places. Stephen Haynes talks about this in his book, Race, Pedagogy in the City, which everyone should read. About black urban spaces as places of resistance, as sustenance, of intellectual life, of cultural production, and it's about appropriating these spaces both materially and symbolically, rebranding them, renaming them, closing schools and giving them new names, and therefore giving the space a new name, and therefore creating a new identity that new people can move into. So this year they closed 50 schools. 87% of the students affected, again, were African American. This was supposedly in response to a $1 billion budget deficit. Although the mayor was sitting on a $1.7 billion tax increment financing slush fund, which is funding that's supposed to go to schools, libraries, and parks, that's siphoned off for development. The closing of these schools is devastating to these communities. There's almost no public schools left in some black communities. So this is more than just gentrification at this point. It's actually about the state, the government abandoning communities, wholesale abandoning communities. The value that those communities have from the standpoint of Chicago Public Schools is as commodities essentially for charter schools, these big charter school chains. At the same time that we have a $1 billion deficit, the mayor apportioned, or the school board, the appointed board, appointed $100 million for a new Jones High School, which is a state-of-the-art selective enrollment school downtown, and just appointed more funds for other selective enrollment schools. So the situation is pretty clear that this is about creating a two-tier education system in what is essentially a dual city, and for a two-tier labor force as well. So these attacks have produced a tremendous resistance and resilient resistance on the part of communities, beginning in 2004. Okay, I'm just about finished. So as you may know, parents and teachers have been protesting these school closings every single year. It was a Latino and Black parent organizing that produced the Caucus of Rank and File Educators, which was a radical caucus that took the leadership of the third largest teachers union in the country. The teachers union strike in 2012 was not about wages, was not about working conditions, it was about privatization, it was about school closings, it was about too much testing, it was about pushing kids out of school. That was the real agenda. So that is a situation that that we're in which we have had tremendous resistance in Chicago every year that has inspired people nationally and globally. During the strike, teachers and parents took over downtown day after day for 9 days, 30,000 people downtown. So there is an education movement awakening in Chicago. And it's not only African American and Latino parents. The budget cuts have brought in white parents as well. We have two multiracial, overlapping, they're coalitions, two multiracial, cross-city, cross-class coalitions against school closings and privatization and for an elected representative school board. So I want to end by saying what I think are 3 insights from what we've been doing in Chicago. The first is that, we've lost a lot. And it's very easy to sit here and say it's a protracted struggle, but when it's Marcus Garvey that closes, we've lost a lot. And that is because we are up against very powerful interests. So I think one of the things that we're really grappling with is how on the one hand we're facing something that's very urgent, but on the other hand we're facing a struggle that's very protracted. And how do we address that? And so although we've lost a lot of schools, we have won a great deal, actually. We've created a tremendous amount of critical consciousness. Education is on the agenda every day in Chicago, including our perspective, not just their perspective. We've made an elected school board, school closings, the big agenda in Chicago, and we're building this movement. But it is a protracted fight. But what we've learned is that you can't understand something as a defeat or a victory in and of itself. So when the Wisconsin uprising happened and it was smashed, it inspired the teachers union. The teachers union struggle inspired thousands of parents to come out against the school closings. The second thing is that one of the biggest things that we lack is political imagination. We lack an imagination that things could be different. And so we can't just be against things. We're not just against Renaissance 2010. We have to be for things. And so what we have emerging in Chicago is a counter community-driven agenda, which I won't go into because I ran out of time. But it's one that has come from the community and is the beginning of a different agenda for schools, understanding that the kind of schools we have is a vision of the kind of society we want to have. And the third thing is that education struggles are not in a silo. They're linked to housing, to health, to jobs, and we have the beginning of a citywide coalition of 27 organizations called Take Back Chicago that has a comprehensive agenda around all those things that is about a people's agenda for the city. So I want to end with this, which is, and I could talk about that later, but what I want to end with this is actually to go really far away, is to invoke Henri Lefebvre, a French sociologist, writing in the 1960s in the time of the uprisings in France. And Lefebvre talks about the struggle for the right to the city. And he says the right to the city is both a cry and a demand. It's a demand for what we need, and it's a cry for something else, for a different kind of city, to make it the city that we wish to have. And that, I think, is the struggle that's before us, to capture the cry and the demand in an agenda for a new education.
Wow. Good afternoon. My name is Shahara Shearer, better known as Shay by my friends, which you all are. I am a parent and a grandparent who happens to be employed by Cleveland Metropolitan School District as a school secretary. I see it all. I've had the privilege of being in both entities. I've been in a K-8 building, and for the last 3 years, I've been in a high school. I've seen the parent come in with the kindergartner, and I've had to hand the parent a Kleenex because she was crying so hard because the baby was going off to the kindergarten for the first day. And unfortunately, I've seen the parents that have come in to enroll their students into my high school, and I never see them again. It's very, very sad that our parents stop being involved at a certain point. And so that's what I want to talk to us about today. As I was introduced and told, I wear many, many hats. I'm a delegate, I'm an executive board member. I have a contract that says this is what protects me. The teachers have a contract that says this is what protects them. What do the students have? Their parents are their protection. They have to be their voices. They have to be their advocate. For if not, then their voices are lost. It's really, really, really sad. Public schools are a public institution. Our school districts should be guided by a commitment to provide all children with the opportunity to attend a quality public school in their community. The corporate model of school reform seeks to turn public schools over to private managers and encourage competition as opposed to collaboration between schools and teachers, parents, and communities. These strategies take away the public's right to have a voice in their local schools and inherently create winners and losers among both schools and students. Our most vulnerable children become collateral damage in these reforms, and we can't accept this anymore. In the city of Cleveland, we passed a levy. We have to make these people accountable with our voices for everything that they do. Now, they have this levy. We have these investment schools. The organization that I'm the chairperson for, Common Good Ohio, has started having community conversations so that we can have conversation with the mayor's office, with the CEO's office, to let them know how our parents are impacted in these buildings. When those students come to me to enroll in the school, it's not just the student that we have to deal with. We have to deal with mom doesn't have a job, dad's out of the house, it's 7 children in the house, they don't have any food, they don't have any clothes. We have to deal with that whole child, not just if she's gonna learn her ABCs. So one thing that we talk about in our conversation in these investment school meetings is the wraparound services that need to be in our buildings. We want to make sure that these investment schools have that. But how do we make sure of that? We have to go to the city council meetings. We have to go to the school board meetings. We have to go to the schools and let the principals know that we don't appreciate the fact that you have opened up a school on a levy that you said is going to be okay, and we don't have the teachers in the classrooms that we need. True. They don't have the books that they need. Or the technology, they have a computer, but it doesn't work. We, as the community, as the parents, as the grandparents, we have to be that village that the children need, the village that we had when we grew up. You know, I couldn't get from the one corner to the other without that neighbor calling my mother and telling her that I was playing in the street when I wasn't supposed to. That's the village that we don't have anymore. We're so used to having a closed mind and closed eyes. We don't want to see what's going on because it doesn't affect us. But it does. Because when I'm 60 years old and I have to go down the street to the corner store and the person that I was supposed to help educate is not educated, and then they want to take what I have in my pocket, then whose fault is that? We have to start to become involved in our communities and make sure that everything that our children need and they get. One of the other things that our organization is working on is to try to have conversation with some of the big nonprofits in our community. They don't pay taxes. If we had a fraction of that money, what could we do with that? 2 days ago, we had a big breaking news announcement about the Browns. They want to spend $120 million to improve a stadium that just opened. What could we do with that $120 million with our children? I mean, we really need to start asking these questions in our community, because at the end of the day, they're making a profit, and the owners can take that $120 million out of their pockets and open up and do whatever they want to do with the skylines and all of that stuff. It doesn't have to come out of our children's mouths, out of our children's brains, out of our children's pockets. It shouldn't have to. So we're going to try to have dialogue with these nonprofits to talk about a program called Pilot. It's payment in lieu of taxes. We want to have dialogue with the mayor. We've had dialogue with the CEO of the school district to try to come to some type of organization, some understanding, so that we can get some of those funds that they have and do something responsible for our children's education in the city of Cleveland. I don't have 10 minutes worth of things, because that is my passion. That's how I feel. We have to get up off our tails and do something about it. I have a 7-year-old granddaughter. I have a 17-year-old. 3 of my other children have graduated. I have a 1-year-old grandson. I don't want to have this conversation when my 1-year-old is getting ready to graduate because he hasn't gotten the education that he so rightfully deserves in this city. So I ask you to get that gut, in whatever is in your gut, and go out into your communities, have a conversation with the principal, have a conversation with the mayor, show up, show out. We got to do what we need to do. But I want to end with this. There's a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King that says, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter." We, as parents, grandparents, community people, activists, cannot afford to become silent, because if we do, our future and the future of our children will begin to end. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Hi. My name is Alexis Crosby. I'm a recent alum from Case Western. I just graduated in May. Yay! I just wanted to ask, how many high school students are in the room? Can you just raise your hand? Oh, okay. Give them a hand, because they gave up their Saturday to do this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am, my background, so you can just get an idea of the lens I'm coming from. Then I'm going to talk about largely my high school experience and the experience I've had working with high school students, because I've been a tutor mentor for many years through a program here on campus called Project Step Up. The director is right over there in the purple hat, Miss Janice Eatman-Williams. Just to tell you a little bit about me, I'm a Clevelander. I grew up in Glenville. I started my education actually at a private Catholic school, so my first teacher was a nun. And then she was actually a really sweet lady. Her name was Sister Barbara. I visited her until I was about 14. Yeah, so she was a very sweet lady. But there were some challenges that were going on in the school, so I ended up being homeschooled for, I would say, from the time I was in 4th grade to 8th grade, and then I went to Glenville High School. So I came into the issues of public school with kind of a very fresh lens. I didn't know much about public schools because I never went. My parents both went, but you know, it's different. They didn't really talk about it. My cousins and all that were in public school, you know, they don't talk about school. They're like, oh, it's school. It's all right. I don't want to go there, but I got it. So, you know, they talked about it. I also have had experiences, as I said, working with students, tutoring, mentoring, both at Church of the Covenant, their Saturday program, which went on earlier today, I'm sure, and at Glenville High School, my alma mater. I made a commitment to start going back when I was in college, and I did. So one of the reasons is because I went through that school. So I'm going to focus on my in-school experiences, the experience I've had with public school, particularly at Glenville, and also an experience I had working at a charter school and some of the things I saw. I'm not going to get into the debate of whether charter schools are right or not. I think they both have, there are reasons they exist in some instances. For instance, my parents gave up on the public school. For real. My little sisters never went through public school. They were in charter schools, they were homeschooled. They said, no, we're not doing that whole public school thing. And there are lots of parents that opt out in a lot of ways, and I think that's a problem in some ways, but parents do what they think is best. So I'm not gonna have that argument because I can see both sides of the argument. And it's a very complicated one. But I will say that it seems to me that even the very high-performing charter schools kind of self-select out the cream of the crop, the ones that are the most privileged of the kids that they're enrolling. You know, the parents that have time to invest in, for instance, enrolling their kids. If you have to have 4 or 5 points of contact before you enroll your kid into a charter school, it's kind of hard for someone who's working full-time or 2 jobs or 2 parents who are working full-time. So the person that, you know, has multiple adults that are worried about their education will definitely get into those schools first. The ones that have multiple adults that can continue to advocate for their education are the ones to get in first. And they're probably going to be the ones that say they want to opt out of the public school first because they're so worried about what's going on in public schools. At least that makes sense to me. But I will say when I started at Glenville, it was a very strange experience for me because for a very long time I was homeschooled. That meant my education was very specialized. You know, it was based on my interests, my grade level, and I was taught that way. And it was just me and my mom and my sisters once they were school age because they were homeschooled too. So going into a class with 30 or 40 students because of budget cuts and other things was a culture shock. But more than anything, it wasn't the size of the classes, it was the lack of materials. If we had textbooks, they were from the 1960s or 70s. So of course the information was not necessarily accurate. And maybe the teachers couldn't necessarily teach from that textbook because A, they're not relevant at all anymore. They're 30 or 40 years old. So that was something that was really interesting to me. One of the things that I think is interesting because I tend to go back to high schools is that was probably the least welcoming learning experience that I'd ever had. And for me, that's something to say because I loved learning. From a young age, I was an early reader. I was into all types of different things. I loved going to plays, and I just loved to learn. So for me, who is someone who loves to learn and who learns outside of a classroom, for me to have struggles in a public school, what does that mean for someone who doesn't necessarily do that? You know, those are the kids that are more likely to fall through the cracks. And even the kids that are like me are less likely to think that high school is important besides the piece of paper that it'll give you after 4 years of, you know, nothing. And I'm just being honest. If you're in a high school, you might feel like you got nothing. Even if you're a high-performing student. And I can tell you about that. When I was a 9th grader, I was feeling like I was kind of getting nothing. I went to my guidance counselor's office because that's where you're supposed to go when you get help. And I told him, well, how do I fix this? You know, and his immediate answer was to enroll me in a program that took me out of the building most of the time. It was inside of the school district, but I'm just saying, if you have to take your students out of the school building for them to have a valuable education, what does that say about what's going on in the schools? So, something to think about. In working with my students, I've seen echoes of some of the challenges that me and my classmate had, but most of it is that there's kind of a disconnection between the value of even going through high school and what you want to do once you get out. Even if you know what you want to do, there's not really a correlation between, you know, I need to take this math class because I need to improve my math because I really like engineering and I want to be an engineer. And I don't think that people in the school building make that connection well enough. And sometimes it might not be a connection because you don't have the classes that it would take for you to really complete a rigorous engineering coursework anywhere in the country. Which are some challenges that happen in poor neighborhoods that have community schools. And it's something that a lot of people don't think about because, you know, they kind of corral you in a lot of ways. You know, why are you having in-school suspension where we have 30 kids sit and stare at the walls for a few hours to all day, depending on who's running it. And they're missing instructional time, even though they got up and they came to school and they're there. That's wasting resources, and it's wasting a teacher that could be teaching instead of running in-school suspension. So I feel like even more the materials, not having a welcoming, friendly learning environment, the school not actually being a place where you can learn is a big problem. Even with the schools I worked with, even with the kids I worked with when I was an undergraduate or when I was coming in and providing services, the challenge was not the coursework. And that's what we found out quickly, so we kind of moved away in a lot of ways from just doing coursework. The challenges were that they could not navigate the school building. And this goes back to a lot of what Matt said. You know, if you think of yourself being in a yard and you have a constantly moving electric fence, and those are the rules. If the rules are constantly changing, depending on who you're talking to or what you're talking about, how do you navigate that? How do you keep yourself even in the school building to learn? Or even decide that you want to learn in that school building, because obviously, for students at least, they're not providing real services in a lot of ways. So we can talk about that. Want to talk about my other experiences? I'm down with that too. This completes it.
Okay, boy, my. If you began a session like this one saying you're an educator because it's your calling, and then you hear how daunting this is, and then you acknowledge that you're a mother and you're a grandmother, and my grandchildren are almost 2, 7, and 16. You don't know. What was the phrase you gave us? Cry or demand? So that's where we are. It's a both-and moment of I want to weep. We were at our last social justice think tank. A young lady talked about pages being torn out and nobody being concerned about what Alexis was talking about, pages missing from her textbook. And I remember feeling, my Lord, we all should have been on the floor wailing and gnashing of teeth. A lot of us were sad and then we went on out. So you all just touched on so many issues. I used to live in Sandy Hook. So my sons, who are now adults, called me. It's like they couldn't believe what had happened there. So that's kind of the issue. We need to believe it. All these are all facts up here. We have to believe it. So I guess if we're all talking about, the last session helped us, if we're all talking about how do we reframe the narrative, how do we educate the community? And now the community is all of us. How do we get people to understand, it's not just the people who went to the think tank, that this issue affects all of us? So I love the issue of going to the nonprofits. But I guess I'd like for each panelist to think about, we're all sitting here, we're all pumped, we're fired up, we already care about this issue. We're the village you're talking about. But I guess the issue is the people who, I used to be, when I was at George Mason, I was over this initiative called the American Democracy Project. It was a civic engagement project. And what I talk about is when people close that curtain and vote, we don't know what they're doing. And often they're voting against our interests. The interests we just shared here, they're often voting against it. So yeah, the levy did pass. The levy did pass. So there's another level of work now that it did pass. But I've lived in communities where people stop voting for the levy because their kids live somewhere else. So I guess I'm just interested, for those of us who live in this community or near it, how do we educate the community that this issue affects all of us, not just those of us in this room who care about social justice, who are already working on social justice? And I'd like for the panelists to try to address that if you can. And if you think you've already addressed it, I apologize. I don't mean to insult you. I'm just trying to ask, I'm trying to reframe it another way. Whoever wants to start. Okay, Alexis.
I don't know, because I think one of the challenges for people that are stakeholders, which are teachers and parents and students, is that it's not that they're not necessarily educated that this is an issue. They kind of know the space of education. They know that charter schools are popping up, they know that schools are closing, and they know that their kids are probably not getting textbooks and things like that because their kids are going to school every day. I think the problem is that a lot of people don't think that they can do anything. And I think it's funny, I actually kind of forgot about that part of it. Talking about the Power Up platform, the first issue that we came up with, and we actually came up with it, we were in small groups, and it was a lot of young people. I would say most of us were between 15 and 26 or so. The most pressing issues that we came up with were education, anti-bullying, conversations around race, conversations around building coalitions across social justice issues, and being interested in reincarceration and dealing with reentry of people who were previously residents of incarcerated spaces. So, and actually we had 6 issues, but education came up twice, so we consolidated that. But one of the biggest issues was not that people were not educated, but people thought that they could do absolutely nothing about it. You know, teachers and parents and students all know that these are issues in different ways. They may not see it as a larger systematic issues, but they know these are issues in their schools, but they don't think that they individually can do anything about it. Or the thing they think they can do is unenroll their kid and place them somewhere else.
What if we change the verb to empower then? I'll say empower and educate. That's your answer.
Yeah.
Is you've answered.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll add empower to it if the panelists can speak about that, because I think Alexis is right. Sometimes people do know, they're educated, but they don't know what is next. So whichever way you want to answer it, educate or empower.
Okay, so I think to educate our community is, first of all, you have to own it. If you don't own it, it doesn't affect you. But if I own the school down the street, whether I have a child that attends there or not, and I go down there and I have the right to walk into that building and see what's going on. I might have to make an appointment, whatever their rules may be, but I have to own it first. Once I own it, then I can do what I want to with the education, and I can take that back to my village and say, look, I went down here and this is not right. We need to do something about it. You gotta own it.
I mean, the other thing I think, right, in the education space, this is one of those spaces, you know, where everybody has an opinion, right? Like everybody went to school, right? And so, you know, it doesn't matter if you're a second grader or a senator, right? Like you have a very clear opinion and vision on what school is, and I think our goal is really on what school can be, right? And how you can empower that, right? How you can have those discussions, how you can bring those discussions. And so, you know, for us right now, I think part of the real goal is how do we make that a conversation that students and parents are at the center of, but has voices of support in the room, be they educators, be they advocates, right? You know, it's a juvenile court judge in Clayton County, Georgia, who looked at this astronomical spike in referrals from the school to his court, 90% of which were for misdemeanors. And it was he who kind of picked the school district up, along with local law enforcement, by the nape of the neck, and community leaders and others, and sat around a table and said, you know, we've got to work together to get this done. They drafted a school offense protocol that delineated the bright lines between what is a matter of safety that had to be handled by his court and what is a matter of discipline that had to be handled by the school. When they did that, they cut the referral rate down by over 70%. Right? And no surprise, right? The graduation rate increased by 24%, right? So how do you get the right people around the table who understand that the center of that table has to be the parents and the students who are in those schools and most affected?
I feel like this is a really hard question. It's a really complicated question. And I think part of it is who are we talking about when we say educate and empower? Like, who are we? That's part of the question. So, and I think, so the response is actually different depending on who we're talking about in terms of who are we. So when you were saying you have to own it, so that's very true. And so if you close schools, for example, and you set up charter schools, and there really is and I really agree with what Alexis said, there is a very complicated conversation about charter schools. But if you create schools that are not just serving the community and where the community has no voice at all, then it's harder to own that space. But I think it depends on who we're talking about. So I guess I could just talk about what I think about a piece of this. And that is that one thing that's happening is that the economic crisis is changing the context, and we really need to understand that. So when you have when you have millions of dollars in budget cuts in Chicago, it actually cuts across schools. And it actually affects schools that up until now have not been affected. And it actually brings in more middle class people, more white people, more advantaged schools into a conversation or an antagonism with Chicago public schools, in the case of Chicago. And this is happening around the country. And so what we've seen is, and not just through that, but through negating parents' voices, parents who feel very entitled. They expect to have a good education for their children, and all at once they don't. All at once they see the art and music being cut and class sizes increasing and so forth. So it does create an opportunity. These are very unstable alliances for many obvious reasons, right? So I'm not suggesting that they're stable alliances. They're very unstable alliances. But it does create an opportunity and a opportunity to educate and to create a broader common ground. So that's one thing. I think that people, at least in the context that I'm in, that people are learning as a result and becoming empowered as a result of the struggles that folks have actually engaged in. It's not folks like me that's educating people in communities. It's people in communities are educating each other through the struggles themselves. The main thing that I worry about that I'm struggling with right now in terms of what you said about empower is how do we stay strong for the long term when we're taking so many hits? And that part is something that we really need to think about. We can have a long view, a broad political analysis, a protracted view. We can understand that the arc is long, but it bends toward freedom. But in the meantime, pain is occurring. So what we're actually seeing is many parents right now in Chicago are very disheartened. Parents who came out to fight for their schools, who did everything they could imaginably do, and they closed them anyway because they never intended not to close them because it had nothing to do with what the parents did, and it's because it's about that bigger corporate, capitalist, white supremacist agenda that I talked about earlier. So that's what I'm struggling with, and so I don't have answers. I have questions on that.
We can open it up now.
Yeah, question.
Yes.
It's for the first panelist and the second panelist. In local religious and parents portray, how does this exacerbate what is perceived to be as egregious in terms of expulsion and suspension? Then we have the status of in what is incorrigible and defined. These type of framing is coming from a Eurocentric, exurban, suburban front. And you have the charge of in-local parentis and parents portray, which gives them a licensure to expel as well. You say, I'm familiar with this on the internet level, you say the law enforcement is coming, this is not something that's been done over the last 20 years. They were doing it before, depending on what they perceived as being defined or incorrigible. So how do you navigate in parents portray and in local parentis in terms of law enforcement and the carte blanche of administration based on that. My second question is this: what is the locus of the university and the academy in terms of the obscenity of regentrification? Because the other sister mentioned about nonprofits, which one of the biggest ones I'm sure she was talking about was Cleveland Clinic. The spatial displacement of the university with the Temple John Hopkins case reserve is coming in the fore. Many of the questions that you elucidated in are happening now with selection enrollment at John Hay, up for Chester, and the displacement within the Huff area, and the foreclosure within the Huff area, Superior area of the Fairfax area. My question to you is, where is the what do you see in the university? You see in the University of Chicago, NYU, John Hopkins, Temple. They have been a parasitical thing on a slum community. What do you see the university at this locus and read?
So you did this to us in the
all
last
right.
session too, man, and I don't know how to answer this real quick because these are amazing questions. Let's do this, right? In loco parentis, right? The idea that, the idea that the school is acting in the place of the parent, right? That when your children are at school, the school is empowered to act and make decisions as though they were the guardian of your child to some degree, right? I think just as a rhetorical point, right? First, and as an advocacy point later, right? Like I don't think a lot of our parents are thinking that if my son or daughter is misbehaving, the right solution is for me to expel them, right? So from the home, from the community, or from the school, and what we've got, there's the lawyerly stuff that you can do, right? And you can talk about due process, right? You can talk about the ways that that you can protect students, right, in that process, right? There are hooks that you have through civil rights laws, through different treatment, disparate impact, all of that stuff, right? But like from a pure organizing perspective, right? Like what parents have done, what students have done, what educators have done to build around this, right? In Chicago, right? Like there's a revised, not enough, but revised discipline code that has already resulted in significant reductions in suspensions, right? Like in Denver, it's that 40% drop in suspensions, right? Like you find right now that there are a lot of educators who are like, this zero tolerance thing that we were talking about is not working, right? Like, and the problem is that a lot of folks will then say, but my hands are tied. This is what I've got to do. This is what the law is. This is whatever it is. And so it's our job as community, right? It's our job as advocates to push back against that, to change that, whether that's to change the law or just to say you don't have to do that, right? Like when I was a teacher, they used to say you couldn't hug a student because you should be worried about a sexual harassment lawsuit, right? Like, and there are things that teachers have to feel empowered to do, right? To change the dynamic in their classroom and make a difference that way too, right? So it's about how do you build that buzz? How do you create that consciousness around these issues in ways that for too long, that language was taken away from the folks in this room that are doing the work, right? And then in terms of, and I want to jump so we can keep it moving, right? But you talked about these more criminalizing subjective offenses like the defiance, the disrespect, all of that, right? Like, this is amazing. Right? Because in Texas, where we filed a Title VI complaint, what you have is a school district basically delegating discipline to school resource officers as though they were the disciplinary arm of the school, right? And they're not there, right? 90% of the time for school safety matters. They have, whether it's because the school is under-resourced, and instead of having a counselor talking to kids, right, they've got a policeman out front, right? Instead of having a dean of discipline discipline, they've got an SRO with arrest authority who's armed, right? Like something's wrong in those schools when instead of protecting children and keeping them safe, a school resource officer has been relegated or delegated into being the person who creates detention, not as an in-school thing that Alexis talked about, but detention at a detention center, right? And so what's happening there is you're using 1960s legislation that was used to break up university-level sit-ins to say that these kids are disrupting public school. Right, and that's what's sending them to juvenile court, right? And the only way you break that up, right, to support whatever organizing is going on is either through the complaints that we file and partner with our community organizations, the Brazos County NAACP, to do, right? Or you find judges like the judge in Clayton County who said, "I don't want this in my courtroom. This is a waste of my time. This is a waste of our resources." Or you do what they did in Denver, which is when the parents pulled together and pushed this off the district's books, right? So this can be done. It is being done, right? And we just have to start doing it together.
I couldn't elaborate on my second question about the nuance.
You can get somebody else a chance to ask the question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
There are a lot of people here.
Anybody else want to respond to the second part of his question?
Very briefly. So you're right. The university in many places is one of the biggest real estate developers and one of the biggest gentrifiers. That's certainly true in the university I'm part of, UIC, University of Illinois at Chicago, which has gentrified, is one of the developers of a whole huge tract of land that has pushed out. It's where Abla Homes was, which was actually the largest housing project in Chicago. And they built this gentrification complex called University Village, which is high-end homes, all sorts of recreation, facilities, leisure, etc. So clearly, the university is one of the biggest real estate developers and is part of the problem. So then what do we do when we're in that place, right? That's the question. So I could say, oh, that's really bad. Well, I'm there. So what do we do about it? So in addition to exposing it and critiquing it and fighting it is the fact that the resources of the university do not serve the community anyway. And so we're in the middle of a black community on the west side, and you need to look for the black students on campus. And you need to look really, really hard for the black students who actually are retained and graduate, and even harder for the black graduate students on campus. And there's a giant sign, so massive you cannot miss it if you go down the highway, that says we're a 21st century urban university or something. And there's very little research or projects or programs that are going on there to actually serve the community. So I think one thing is that those of us who are there and are implicated in these institutions have the responsibility to use whatever resources we can gather. Our intellectual resources, our material resources, whether it's, is this being taped? Okay.
We hope so. We hope so. Yes.
Whether it's copy paper, labels, etc., or certainly our classes, graduate students, undergraduate students, projects, research projects. We have a project going on right now, which we have very little, we're able to finagle some small university funding, but it's to document the effects of the school closings and the visions that parents and communities have for what they want for their schools from the perspective of the parents and the students that are affected. And we're partnering with, various community organizations, obviously, to do that. And we've got 9 people working on the project. It's basically all sweat equity. It's graduate students who are getting independent study credit to do this. And they're learning how to do research, and they're learning how to be in solidarity with communities. So we just got to try to use the university as best we can, because you're right, it's part of the problem.
The other 2 people? Okay, so we'll try to get another right here, and I see some hands over here too. 1, 2, 3. Didn't you have your hand up, sir? No. Okay.
I wanted to focus on something that came out of the film from the streets of Chicago, and has been reflected for me in a number of the comments of the panel. That takes me back to a point in the history of university public education in America. of people don't know that we have universal public education in America because it was demanded by organized labor, by workers who did not want to be in a position of competing with their own children for a job, thereby, in the fabric of that competition, lowering wages so they couldn't afford to feed their children. And now, what do we see in Chicago? The parents went after organizing themselves to deal with some of these issues, couldn't get it. The teachers' union got behind it. So again, we see people organizing and organized labor becoming a part of this struggle to get behind our need for public education and education.
So you had a comment, not a question? Okay.
No, but what I'm saying is, as you look at the resources that are needed, what place do you give this in light of this?
The teachers union?
The organizing of the workers for the needs of their children and organized labor in this process.
Should I answer that?
You sure?
Okay. So in 2008, a group of teachers who'd been involved in the school closings and had been working with parents and the coalition we had at the time, which was then called, we've had so many coalitions, it's all the same people, SOS, I think it was, Save Our Schools, formed a caucus in the teachers union called CORE, Caucus of Rank and File Educators. In 2 years, they won the leadership of the third largest teachers union in the country, 30,000 members. And on a program of essentially an anti-neoliberal, anti-racist program. And the Chicago CTU was a completely moribund, bureaucratized, sold-out union leadership. And most people didn't want to be in the union because why did you have to pay all that money all the time and nothing happened, right? They are rebuilding that union. They spent their resources for an organizing department and a research department, and set about organizing and producing the kind of research that could expose what's actually going on. They won in 2010. In 2012, they led the first teacher strike in 25 years. There were, from what I heard, 16 people who crossed picket lines. Actually, there weren't picket lines at most of the schools because there was no need to have picket lines. So teachers just self-organized demonstrations and marches through the community. So this was very, very powerful and supported by parents. We would not be where we are today without what has happened with the Chicago Teachers Union. The resources that are at our disposal, the power, the organized power of teacher unions and of unions in general, and is actually very, very essential. And we don't, fully grasp this because of what's happened to the labor movement. So this is a social movement union, a union that organizes itself as a social movement and then is allied with other social movements in the way that Latin American social movement unions are organized. So I'm glad you raised that. And all this stuff that happened with parents, they didn't just come out one day spontaneously. They organized. They organized for all these marches, all these sit-ins, all these coming to these hearings. So when we said, what do we do to inform and empower? We have to organize. We have to intentionally organize with strategy and tactics. Yeah, so the union, thank you.
Okay, your hand, then yours, and then I think yours.
I'm from Montgomery, Alabama, and as a civil rights kid, numbers are heard. And how can we get to public square filled with people to let our mayor know that there are issues on education in Cleveland and the lack of in our communities? Not just that one parent who got on TV and talked about substitute teachers are not there and the levy was passed. The next week, the Board of Education had a job bank, a moment fix. Knowing Cleveland has 66% literacy rate and won't be getting jobs, when and how can you tell us to get up? And Shay, are you willing to bring your group to public square in numbers?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I feel like I think Shay and you and the other people in this room would be much better suited to answer that question than I would, because you know your context, you know your people, you know what needs to be done. I mean, we did a lot of very grassroots organizing. We held a lot of public forums. We started talking in 2004 about how this was a business policy. It was all tied to gentrification. It was like all brand new. Now, I'm telling you, you just knock on a door, you know, talk to someone on the street. A lot of people will say that. It's in the media. There's a public consciousness that's evolved out of these struggles. We have a tremendously long way to go. I'm really apologize if I've set up Chicago as this wonderful model where everything's going really great, and they just closed 50 schools. So obviously we haven't done what we need to do, right? So I'm trying to talk about where we are at, and we have made some real gains, but we have a lot more to do. But it is really, you need to have meetings in your living rooms, in churches, in schools, and yeah, and I'm sure Shay would have a lot more to say than me.
To answer your question, we are actually having a meeting on Monday to rediscuss what we've already discussed and to talk about what we're going to go forward with. Again, we needed to wait for the election to be over before we could have dialogue with the mayor about the pilot program. We needed to wait for the election to be over so we could actually sit down again and talk to the CEO. We have a strong faith-based group with our organization, and so, you know, having those conversations in the churches, we're doing that. And so but we can't do it by ourselves. And we can't do it with the 50 people that show up at our meetings. I mean, they really have to get it in the bottom of their bellies and say, they gotta stop saying it's not about me. And it is about us. And so, you know, once we get that out there and we can start to get a groundswell, then we can get the people to fill out Public Square. But it's gonna take a lot of us to do that.
One question of yours, and then I think I saw yours. Okay, go ahead.
All right, I'll try to make this quick. My name's Jeremy. I got a question. Did they close down the Reggio Emilia Chicago Commons Family Centers in Chicago? Please say no. All right, I'm going to hope that that's a no.
I think they did.
Okay, so we got to go to the next question. I've been given the signal.
I'm sorry, prelim.
Oh,
I'm sorry,
okay.
Meryl. But I have a point I've been wanting to make all day. The reason I asked about that is that one of the brilliant things they did in them family centers, which were these, what was the Cleveland term? That's the wraparound services, right? I mean, brilliant places where the teachers came from the community and were trained into the teaching positions, right? So there was the right to be our own teachers, not just I own the school. I have a right to be. I, as a parent, have a right to have my fellow community members be the teachers, right? So, and there was a right to the curriculum. There was a right to the curriculum because it was an emergent curriculum, right? Built off of a challenging dialogue with where the real interests of the community and the children are, right? So this was at the Chicago Family Centers. They also had this thing called parallel processing, where the parents went to school along with the students and the teachers, and where the teachers were doing research along with it the whole time. The whole school was thinking and of course there are no disciplinary or very few disciplinary problems in schools like that because it's social control in Dewey's sense. Everybody's absorbed. So here's my question. You know, one of my concerns earlier today on the academic panel, I was saying this to Dante, was that I'm very sensitive to the way that we educators, I'm an educator in scare quotes, reproduce a system where we are the cans and then there are the can'ts.
That's right.
Can and can'ts, not just have and have not, because have and have not is reproduced and propagated by people saying can and cannot. And everything today, even the people who got all the PhDs on the panel this morning, were tacitly saying, and I was told I can't, and I was told I can't with a PhD, and I was told I can't with tenure, and I was told I can't because of my race or because of my gender or whatever. And so so just one little thing here, and this is my one question. I am totally on board with a large-scale attempt to rethink taxation in this country so that there's genuine equality for all public schools. So I don't want to challenge that. But in environmental philosophy, when we talk about dealing with climate change and moving to a post-fossil fuel economy, we talk about adaptation strategies. And one of the things I haven't heard enough of, and I just want to hear what you folks have been seeing, is the adaptation strategy of parents in the community starting to become the teachers themselves, not in homeschooling. I'm thinking more of the Black Panther model. I'm thinking more of Fred Hampton. I'm thinking more of that kind of community-based political education that starts by making the social world intelligible. And to me, it seems like insofar as the model is still, well, we the teachers have to go educate people, we have to empower people. That is still the same hierarchical model. You need it's got to be the people who want to empower themselves, and if the educators want to help, that's great. But so I'm asking, what kind of adaptation strategies have you been seeing where, if anything, the most the teachers are doing are helping the parents teach their kids themselves in a community? Forget the teachers.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm fired. Am I fired?
No, you're not fired. I just want to throw something. I just want to throw something out there as part of the conversation. We're gonna have to transition in about 10 minutes, but I want to throw something out there as part of the conversation, Jeremy. So, the one thing I want to say about the morning session is the idea of the can versus the cannot. I'm not quite totally sure, and I'm sure we're colleagues, so we'll talk about it some more. But the fact of the matter is that many people don't know how strenuous, arduous the struggle is for people who even make their tiptoe foot into the academy. So for us to articulate the can'ts, and the fact that the can'ts did not keep us from being here trying to do the can, is extremely important to be a part of the narrative. Otherwise, one only thinks of narratives that have upward progressive slopes that are not the reality of life. And when people hit the can't, then they stop rolling towards the can. So part of the fact that we're actually here, and I'm one of 3 women who are African American in the College of Arts and Sciences at this time in the university, and the first woman to be ever tenured African American woman or person in my department of history here in 2004, speaks to you write too black to here I am, right? And in that process, it's created a pathway or potential pathway, not just of individual struggle, but the reality that I didn't get here just by myself on that struggle because I had people behind me pushing. And that is what we were talking about in terms of creating the space and working with community at the center to do the work that we do. So I don't want to get that muddled, but I do think that latter part of the question is something we can talk about, adaptations.
You're last.
I'm also Jeremy. I had a reaction to the discussion, the first question as to how do we kind of go out and, change and reframe the conversation. And it bothers me that what we're not talking about is access to high quality seats. I hear a lot of talk. As Shay mentioned, it's kind of a sense of competition. It's us versus them. It's district versus charter. It's union versus charter. It's us versus them without thinking, how do we bring more access and give students in every neighborhood access to high quality education? Shouldn't that really be the question? Shouldn't that really be the topic? And I think, it's easy to kind of lump everybody together when you're talking about, one group or the other. But I think it's important to take a broad stance, a broad view, and look at some of the organizations, like Alexis was involved with Breakthrough Charter Schools. And I'd like to just quickly highlight the fact that they are collaborating with CMSD. They're partnered, they're sponsored by CMSD. They are taking students who are coming in several grades below grade level, and they're stepping them up. It's a high discipline environment. It's that kind of environment where you give a student the support, and you give a student the attention, and you give a student the resources, and they're going to thrive.
Okay, excuse me. I have to say something because I was on the committee for Breakthrough Charter Schools. I was on their diversity committee. And I'm going to tell you the way, when I first met with the parents whose children were there, the parents felt disenfranchised. The parents felt like when I bring, and you know, and I'm still friends with the CEO, but I said to him, some issues here that you got to deal with. So parents are being asked almost to believe, since you brought them, all is well. That's what I meant in my introduction when I threw my hands up, because there are some parents who feel that way anyway. Ooh, thank God I got them in Breakthrough. There are other parents don't know yet whether they trust that or not. But if they're not welcomed, when they come, I don't want to just pick my child up. I want to ask a couple questions. I have a couple opinions about what's happening. And if that is not acknowledged as a parent's right, if what the charter schools do is say, we got them now, this gets back to your point. If it says, we got them now, they're going to be all right, and there's no place for parents' voices. So I agree. I heard this morning differently. I kept hearing the word solidarity this morning. I didn't hear it, can and can't. I heard solidarity. I heard, I even heard reciprocity, which means you don't assume because you work at the university that you know all the answers. I don't ever, that's the reason I'm on the Social Justice Institute leadership. That's the reason I'm on it, because here was a space where the university, it created a space for me to not represent the university as if I'm the locus of knowledge. But when you go into community and say, we are going to listen, we are going to have a conversation, there will be solidarity, there will be reciprocity. I don't know it all because I'm at Case Western Reserve Premier Research University, proud to be here. But I wasn't always sure that those parents were respected that way. Now, many of them may be, but it gets back to what Alexis was saying about selectivity. The parents who can get off work, show up all the time, the parents whose schedules don't lend themselves to that visibility, what's going to happen then? So I want to be careful about name dropping, because I appreciate that Alexis was absolutely right. We got to be careful about doing the us and them charter, not charter, because there are people doing good charter work. I get that. Parents deserve choice. I get that. But I'm just real careful about saying how good a particular one is, when I've been in conversation with some people who have said, I just tried to go ask about, I was treated as if I don't have a right to ask.
That's why we need an active public. Yeah. Because the issue is you don't have rights when somebody owns the school.
Right. Yeah.
And so while the issue is, the issue is, there's nothing wrong with adapting and communities creating their own schools. But when you have a situation where there's these nonprofit big enterprises coming in and setting up a school and technically owning the school, then parents have no right. So it's a not either or, but where's
right.
the slippery slope?
Right.
And at what point do we fight for taxes to go to the least?
To the least of these.
The least sector of our population that needs education. So.
Okay.
Can I just?
I was told that we are out of time and we have. I'm sorry, panel. You can finish, and then Alexis, two people on the panel can respond, and then we got to be done.
Okay, sure. So
I don't know whose time we're taking.
There's a lack of education of the number of students. Right now, there's 22,000 students in K-8 who are in failing schools, and so Breakthrough Schools isn't perfect. I'm sure they could do better in terms of engaging parents at across the network. But I also have heard that parents from the Breakthrough Schools Network, and in particular, that's what I'm most familiar with, do comment regularly that they cherish the fact that they feel that their students are safe there. And that's, really, that puts them at ease when they drop their students off. And, there's a lot of follow-up from the teachers, so they do feel that they're engaged with. So I would say let's, like you said, there are some good charter schools and there are some really abysmal charter schools that really tarnish the name. But I would challenge, all of us, as we think about education, not to think us versus them, but think quality seats of education.
Thank you.
Failing? Why are the schools failing? Why are we letting them fail? This is the question. question. This is the question. What are we gonna do with our babies? This is the question.
Okay, I don't know, 2 panelists can respond, and then we've got to go. Alexis and Shay?
So, I just wanted to address your point. You're talking about quality seats, and I appreciated my experience with Breakthrough, and I have nothing bad to say about the education they're providing to the students that are there. But let's be very serious. The students that can get into there are, like I said, students that have multiple parents that are in their lives that can get them enrolled to that school. Not all students that want to be in that school are going to get into that school, regardless of where they are. Second, you have to look at the retention of those students. A lot of the students cannot complete the curriculum. The students that are in those schools and matriculate through and graduate, they do get extra education. I'm not arguing about that. I know students that graduated from Breakthrough schools and are doing well. But the students that don't, that have to drop out halfway for various reasons, 6th, 7th grade, they're not getting that education in a lot of ways. So I'm not belaboring the point, but I'm saying the data is very skewed.
So
I was told I need to thank the panel. What? Oh, I'm sorry, wait a minute, what?
Everybody on the panel can respond.
Okay, thank you, everybody can respond.
So thank you for raising this, because this is one of my areas I love to talk about. So I think the first thing is we need to be really clear that the reason that charter schools are attractive is because of the disinvestment in public schools. It's what Gloria Ladson-Billings calls the historic education debt owed to African American and Latino students and working class students whose schools have been historically disinvested in, and particularly disinvested in over the last 30 years as cities have moved to market cities where everything is about the market and the country's about the market. So that's the first thing. That's why charter schools are attractive. So it's not about blaming parents or even teachers who can't even find jobs in public schools anymore because their schools are being closed. So the first question is, it's a disinvestment in the public, and it's not something that happened in the past, it's something that's happening right now. Every time you open a charter school in Chicago with external foundation funding, you are siphoning off students from public schools, which are then further designated to be under-enrolled and set up to be closed. We drew maps that looked at schools that were under-enrolled and were surrounded by charter schools. So that's the second thing. The third thing, and I've got a few, is that the national data confirm what Alexis said, actually. What the national data show us is that most charter schools, only 17% of charter schools are doing better than comparable neighborhood schools. 33% are doing worse, and the rest are doing the same. This is after all the autonomies and all the extra funding and all of that. Even people who were charter school advocates 10 years ago are saying, with all that, and they're not doing any better on these measures. When we look at the research on charter schools, those that are doing better, what we see is exclusion. They serve fewer low-income students of color. Fewer low-income students, they serve fewer special education students, and they serve fewer second language learners. And they have a higher push-out rate. The next thing is you talked about safety. I'd really be interested in your model of safety, because what we see in a lot of the big charter school chains around the country is that their model of safety is military-style discipline. So why is it that white middle-class children don't have these charter schools? And why is it that this model of discipline is appropriate to African American students and Latino students, and it's not appropriate for my children? I don't get that. Are these different kinds of children? They need different kinds of discipline. What we need to distinguish between is, it's true, there are some community-driven, parent-driven, community-oriented, culturally centered charter schools that have been started by churches, community groups, because they've thrown up their hands at the failure of public education to serve their children. We need to distinguish between them and the KIPS, the Green Dots, and all these massive charter school chains. And what we need to be clear about is, even in the states where there have to be nonprofit, like in Chicago, they contract out management to for-profits. And much more important than that is that the charter school industry is now one of the biggest markets for financial investments, in which charter school bonds are a key source of capital accumulation on the global financial markets. They put an Edison Learning Charter School in Oakdale Gardens, which is a public housing project on the south side of Chicago, where we have worked for years with people for community recovery. And they closed a public school, put in a charter school. That charter school was run by Liberty Limited. Liberty Limited is a transnational financial corporation. That's who's educating children in Oakdale Gardens. So we need to be clear about what we need is a reinvigorated, transformed public education sector. Not the public schools we have now, the public schools we want. And the last thing I want to say is the money is there. We are not broke. The problem is it's in the hands of a very few people, and it's not being used to serve our people. And I'm sorry if I got irate, but I'm irate about this because they are disinvesting in our children and making money off of them. And our kids are more than products. Yes.
Let's thank this panel. Let's thank the panel.